Hi, this is Nick Katko from BMA, and welcome to today's webinar on practicing lean. In terms of practicing lean accounting, we're going to be talking about improving accounts payable. And I'm doing all the technical things by myself today. My colleague Mike DeLuca is running a little bit late. He's stuck in traffic. So the first thing I would like to do is do a quick check. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Can you see my screen? And if you can just type something into the question pane, that would be really, really good. You can hear me, you can see me, and you can see the screen. Okay, great. A few people have responded. That's good. I actually have done some webinars where it hasn't worked out that way. Anyway, all right, so let's do all the technical stuff, administrative stuff beforehand, and then before we start. A copy of the presentation is in the handout pane, and you can download it. If you forget to download it, or if you are watching this webinar recorded, simply send me an email. I'll be glad to send you a copy of the presentation. Next, if you are a certified public accountant in the United States and would like to receive 1 hour of continuing education credit for this webinar, there are 3 requirements. Number 1 is each of the 3 polling questions, which are attendance checks, you must answer. You must stay logged in to the event for at least 50 minutes. And no credit can be given if you listen to the recorded webinar. And so, again, I'll remind you at the conclusion of the webinar, if all you have to do is send me an email and I'll send you out a certificate in a couple days. All right, so that takes care of the administrative part of the webinar. So let's review what we're going to be talking about today. First, we're going to talk about lean thinking as it applies to accounts receivable and actually all accounting processes. We're going to talk about studying the process, which is really the first step before you start getting into improvement, because you got to understand what you're dealing with, what the problems and issues are. Excuse me. Talk about the daily lean management in accounts receivable. Then we're going to give you some approaches to making improvements in receivables based on our work with companies over the years. Then we'll wrap up and take questions. Please enter the questions in the question pane and we'll try to get to them. And if by some chance we don't get to the questions, we will be glad to answer them either by email or actually even hop onto a short online chat, if you want to discuss things further. And a lot of what we're talking about is in our book, Practicing Lean Accounting. There's a lot more detail in the book. This webinar is just like an overview of one part of one chapter. Excuse me. All right, so let's start with lean thinking. This, forms the foundation for any type of improvement that you want to do in accounts receivable. Now, I read a lot of accounting professional publications, and and there's always talk about improving accounting. But I think, and I'm editorializing here a bit. I think a lot of the professional publications don't really address the idea of lean thinking. They just talk about process improvements. So what what does accounts receivable need to know? What does the accounting team need to know? Keep things simple when you're talking about lean thinking. It is a people-centered learning and improvement strategy for an organization. There's lots of definitions of lean out there. Keep it simple. The reason that we use this definition is because it's about people learning, and people making improvements, right? We're not talking about technology doing this. We're not talking about artificial intelligence doing this. We're talking about people. So lean thinking is grounded in, first, understanding customer needs and what the customers require from a process. Because, if you have any experience with the principles of lean, the first principle of lean is customer value. Second, understand what's getting in the way of meeting those customer needs. That can be waste. That can be also other types of work that has to be done but doesn't really create value. And so it's more of a thinking framework. And the reason that this is important in receivables and all accounting processes is that, accountants, by the nature of the work that they have to do, we get into our work. We're always busy doing work. We're busy fighting fires. We know what our deadlines are. We have a good idea of what our customers want from a transactional standpoint. And so we just get things done. And you know what? We're good at it. And so it requires a step back, and it requires a different framework for thinking, because we want to distinguish between, activities that create value and activities that don't create value. Now, what's unique about accounts receivable compared to other accounting processes is that it directly impacts the customer's entire experience with the company. Accounts receivable deals with the company's customers. And, here's the ways they deal with them. I sometimes call these like touch points. One is, you think about the data management of customer information, setting up customer information, maintaining accurate data. Now, accounts receivable may have a direct impact on that in terms of setting up the customer. For example, maybe in a smaller company, accounts receivable does that. Larger company, it might be done maybe by, like order entry. But then there's the changes, and any piece of customer data that is not accurate is a defect and can cause a problem in transaction processing. Customer credit, establishing and managing customer credit limits. This is essential in terms of the customer's ability to place orders. So, the speed of establishing a credit limit for a new customer, and then also managing credit limits. Okay, so there's a direct impact there. The most obvious part of accounts receivable that impacts the relationships with the company's customers is the billing process, delivering on-time accurate invoices. You think about the application of customer payments, okay? There's a quality, what we want to do in receivable is accurately and promptly apply the customer payments to the right invoice, because that can have an impact, for example, on customer credit. And then you get into the application of payments, also can impact collections. If accounts receivable misapplies a payment to the wrong invoice, accounts receivable may think, oh, this invoice is past due, but the customer, they paid what they thought was a different invoice, and then you get into managing those collections. So there's a lot of activity besides the billing that accounts receivable touches with customers. And that becomes very important in basically the management of accounts receivable and also improving accounts receivable. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to do the first polling question. Let me get to it. I'm doing all the technical pieces. So attendance check number 1, I'm going to launch the poll and please answer it. So Mike DeLuca, are you there?
I am here.
Okay, good. You made it.
Indeed.
Okay. All right, I'll give everybody about 5 more seconds to answer the poll, and then I'm going to close it. All right. Close the poll. I'm not going to share the results because it's just whether you're attending or not. And so what I'm going to do now is turn the narration over to Mike.
Super, thanks. So like Nick was saying, we start out when we're looking at lean, a lean approach to understanding and improving accounts receivable. We start out with who's the customer and what's important to them. And like Nick said, this is a process it is a little bit unique with finance and accounting's work in that we're directly touching the company's end customer. So let's step back and take a look at the end-to-end process, talk a little bit about the process, and then like Nick said earlier, once we've identified the customer and what's important to them, let's start to talk specifically about what's getting in the way. So as Nick outlined the different touch points in the accounts receivable process, we'll look at them in 2 major sections. One of them is getting the bill to the customer. And then the other one is collecting the funds or the payments from the customer and then posting them. So in each one of these sections, and Nick talked about customer maintenance, and the order process is going to be different based on what type of company. If you're in a service industry, the order process may be a reservation in a hotel. It may be creating an appointment to see a doctor or to have your car serviced. So that's the order process, and then I'm sorry. And then the order is obviously the order is fulfilled based on the terms, and then we're going to bill the customer. Now, billing obviously can happen immediately when a product is delivered, or it may be billed afterward. There are a lot of different aspects of this, so we're going to look at those in a moment a little bit more specifically, and in particular, when you analyze your own organization's order to cash or accounts receivable process, be attentive to, do you have simple or complex situations in these different categories? So for example, are your terms and conditions standard and uniform? Or is each customer billed based on some unique or very specific terms in their contract or relationship that don't exist in other customers' contracts and relationships? Do certain customers pay when items are shipped? Do certain customers pay when they are delivered or received? Do certain customers pay in part at the time of order? So there may be some complex terms and conditions. How is the order fulfilled? If this is a product that's delivered, or is the customer paying when it's shipped or delivered? That can be relatively simple, a one-time payment. Or are we talking about something like construction or delivery of a service over time, like a subscription service that needs to be renewed or has regular payments? And are we going to make progress payments or be paid for a service period? How does the customer validate that they received the goods? And that can be complex in terms of how we actually document the invoice and then how it's paid by the customer. So that can be very straightforward and transactional. You ordered something from Amazon, you paid for it, it showed up, and it's reasonably black and white. Or does there need to be approval and verification of the fulfillment of the order? Again, invoice preparation can be very straightforward, or customers can have unique customer-specific requirements. And then what is the frequency of invoicing? And this can very much impact our work in accounting and finance, because if we are doing a lot of billing at the close of the beginning of the month, then we will have a bolus or a batch of work that may pose more challenges on the accounting team. So we can go forward with that. And now let's talk for a few minutes about the types of wastes in particular in receivables that show up. So when we go through both the customer setup and the invoice creation process, as well as collecting payments and posting them from the customer, at any point in the process, there may be missing or incorrect information. It's possible you received a payment from a customer who has multiple open invoices without clarity around which invoice that gets posted against. It's possible when you're trying to bill a customer that you don't have clear information around what service it is that you're billing for. This happens particularly in industries like healthcare, where we need to be completely need to have complete information in our bills in order to submit a bill to a payer. So overproduction, there's possible that there's too much information on the invoice, which can lead to confusion on the customer's part in terms of paying it, or potentially other delays or issues, and might simply take too much time for the billing team internally to produce. Waiting, anytime we're waiting for inputs or customer payments, anytime we're waiting for a follow-up from a customer, that's obviously going to delay our process and the customer's process. If there are a lot of manual steps or steps that are unnecessary or not making the best use of the skills and capabilities in the accounting team or the billing team, that can be not the highest and best use of their time. A lot of times billing teams can really do a great job in supporting customers by proactively responding to inquiries and questions, but if they are encumbered by a lot of tasky work around creating the invoices and posting the payments, they won't be able to provide as good customer service. And like Nick said, this is one of those one of the few finance processes where we have the opportunity to make the customer's experience of transacting with the organization really, really smooth and effective. A few more wastes here. Transportation, anytime we're moving information around in order to populate the bill or post the payment. Inventory is in particular, when the work is showing up in batches, we may, especially for progress billing, we may have to collect a month's worth of information. This may involve things like employees coding their time to a particular project if that's being billed out to a customer. So there may be large batches of data and information that needs to be collected for a periodic billing cycle, and that may wait until the end of the period to do that, and there can be a big crunch of time and work. Motion, of course, unnecessary searching for information, or even the significant amount of keystrokes and data entry that we need to do to populate the customer invoice. And then any excess processing, reconciliations, reviews of contracts for special terms, reviews of bills before they go to customers to ensure that they comply with the contract. There can be many steps in here. So let's keep going with some of the other aspects of wanting to identify the waste. So we can have a hypothesis about where these wastes show up, and Nick is going to pull up a simple process generic diagram here. But what we find in analyzing a process, and we'll talk about this idea of go-see in a minute, is that the waste occurs within process steps. So I could have a process step which is creating the invoice. But within creating the invoice, there are multiple tasks. I may need to get information around time coding from employees in order to populate that invoice. So each individual task can have one or more of those wastes show up in them. We can get waste from the perspective of the inputs that we're receiving in order to populate the bill. They may be incomplete, incorrect, or there may be a delay. There can be wastes in between process steps, showing up as handoffs, waiting for verification or approval. There can be waste in terms of the output, especially if it's either overproduced or defective from the perspective of the recipient or the end customer. In the upper left, you see the burst with unevenness in it, and that's again related primarily to the monthly cycle, where our work can be very uneven and then create, at what you see at the bottom, an overburden at a certain period of the month. So we want to go see and understand. You may be experiencing many of these wastes in your receivables process. It's important to go see the people who are doing the work, observe the different process steps and the tasks, understand what they're dealing with in terms of the inputs they're receiving, the waste in between steps, and then if there's issues related to inputs or the steps in between what folks on the billing team are doing, go and see those people as well. I spent some time with one billing team who they were doing progress billing. They relied on inputs from timekeeping from many folks associated with a particular project. These were large scale projects. And then folks in different roles needed to code their time to projects in order for that to be included in progress billing. And it was always frustrating for the billing team because they were waiting for a significant amount of time to get the inputs from the folks who were coding their time. And even when there weren't delays, sometimes the information was incomplete or potentially erroneous. So what did they do? They went and they sat with the folks who were coding the time just to see what was involved in their process. And what they realized was there was a great deal of complexity from the perspective of the people coding the time that slowed them down and made the process error prone from their perspective. And the only reason I'm bringing that up is that may not be a common example for anyone listening to the presentation this morning, but it is important, regardless of what types of inputs you get, for you to take the opportunity not just to see and understand from direct observation the work of the billing team, but also if you have inputs from other departments, to really understand by going and seeing what they're dealing with that might be causing the wastes as well. So let's go forward and talk a little bit more about the measurement, and then we'll start talking about some improvement categories before I hand it back to some improvement methods before I hand it back to Nick. It is important in lean thinking to always understand how well is our process performing. So I won't read through all of these, but there are a number of different categories that we encourage you to be attentive to. Is the process timely from the perspective of getting the bill to the end customer? Is there high quality at every point in the process, or are there rework steps on the team's perspective, or even in the back and forth with the customer? How long does the whole end-to-end process take? And is that performing well from the company's perspective and from the customer's perspective? How productive is the team in terms of generating bills and making payments? And that's important, not because we're trying to get the team to work faster or harder, but because it's important for us to be able to line up the volume of work from the perspective of how many bills do we need, invoices do we need to create, and payments do we need to post, to understand, does the team have the capacity to do that work without overburden? There are cost implications in terms of write-offs. On the income statement, on the balance sheet, we may have working capital encumbered by lengthy days in revenue or sales outstanding, and obviously there are impacts on the team as well, with the character of the work and then the impact on their morale.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing, Mike, on this. When you're studying, you want to study the process. And, what we have here listed are measures which you should consider, because, understanding the process and understanding the problems and issues is not just simply talking about the problems or making assumptions. You want to get objective data. Now, measurements are good because it's a fact. It's a objective performance measure, and then you can start talking about moving them. What do we have to do to move the measure? And and it gets people thinking, and it really quantifies the waste. That's really what you want to do here, rather than just making assumptions about it.
And so when folks say the process isn't working well from their perspective or the customer's perspective, we always want to be able to say, how do we know, and answer that with data. When, to Nick's point, we're making improvements, we want to know, how do we know it got better? When it's performing well, we want to know, how do we know that it's staying stable? So let's start to talk about some of those improvements. And in particular, we're going to start, and we often do, with the very first defect, the very first waste, which is defects, and think about error proofing, because a lot of the waste that shows up in any of our processes, and we'll focus on receivables obviously in particular, is that we and the customer spend time in rework loops, or there are delays related to a lack of clarity around information or requirements. So defect examples: incorrect charge on the bill, incorrect payment of the bill, or incorrect posting of the bill. Any of these can be part of your process. So again, like Nick said, we encourage you to study the process and identify and begin to measure the frequency and types of defects in your process, so that you can begin to understand what the root causes might be, or the sources, and then the causes of those sources. So in each of these, we've given a few examples around what sources and causes might be, and then potential ways to avoid those causes early in the process, so that we're not doing unnecessary rework or inspection and checking steps. So for example, if the charge on the bill is incorrect, is it possible that the source is that there is contract complexity which makes pricing less clear? I've seen this in a number of cases in complex businesses, and that's why we talked earlier about the simple and complex situations in different categories or different types of receivable situations. It might be possible that we made an error, or there was an error unintentionally made in assigning billable hours. And so potential ways to avoid those are to, even if we can't simplify contract terms, if you can clarify and normalize them to as much as possible between customers, and make interpretation of contract terms black and white. And this is one of the things I've seen is problematic for billing teams, is that they find that they're in an interpreting role, trying to understand, gee, how should I deal with this situation in this particular case? So again, a couple of examples. If the payment of the bill is incorrect, could it have been misinterpreted by the customer? Is there a way to simplify that bill so that it's clear what is being charged, what discounts have been applied already, and what the customer is responsible for? Do we have a problem at the end of the process with correctly and timely coding and applying the payment to the customer account? And that miscoding could happen prior to when we receive the payment, because we might have a third party that is receiving and coding payments for us. So there might be issues there. I've seen this a number of times in many different businesses where there's a lockbox provider and the methodology that they're using has issues with it. And so we can, again, streamline or clarify potentially the actual documentation to ensure that it's readable, and also clarify those rules around coding so that they're black and white and can be applied by anyone in the process. Just a couple of examples there. And as we think again, and I'll wrap up with just a summary of getting to the highest quality, the most defect-free process, and whether it's receivables or payables or any of our functions, but in particular for receivables, because there is an impact on the end company's customer's experience, and this can erode the customer's trust in the company, the customer's willingness to do repeat business. We want to move from having a defect and beginning to detect it, and to Nick's point, measure and understand it to the point where we can prevent them, so at the very least they never make it to the customer. We don't want rework on our part, but we absolutely don't want a defect to make it to the end customer. Once we've eliminated defects from the end customer's experience, can we also eliminate rework internally and prevent defects from occurring, stopping and fixing them at the source? So again, one of the most important data elements we can recommend is beginning to track the frequency and the type of defects that the team encounters in the process.
All righty, let me move over to the control panel, and let's do attendance check number 2. I'll give you about 5 more seconds to complete the poll. All right, I'm going to close it. Get my screen back. All right. So you study the process, okay? And what's the next step? So we've studied the process. We have data. We understand our defects. We've started putting error proofing practices in place. The next step, and we talk a lot about this in practice in lean accounting, is establishing daily lean management practices. And I'm going to go through the process at a very high level. But what's really important here, a few things to understand. One way I sometimes describe a successful lean accounting transformation is everybody, everywhere, all the time. There's lean thinking going on, and while it's sort of glamorous to say, oh, well, we know what our big problems are in accounts payable and we can solve them, sort of like get the big wins. Sometimes it's difficult for people to be able to do complex improvements or complex problem solving. So when you start on a daily basis with the practices that we're going to talk about, it's a way to start getting people to think differently. And you're talking about what happens in a day. And so everything is fresh on their minds. It's not like you're talking about it once a month and you got to say, well, oh, what happened 3 weeks ago? I really don't remember. One of the ways an analogy for daily lean management in accounting that we use in the book is that it's like a lean classroom. It's like you're going to class every day and you're going to be learning. That's really what this is about. So daily lean management follows the plan, do, check, adjust process, which is the scientific method as it's applied in business, and it's foundational to lean thinking. And when you think of daily lean management in the context of PDCA, it begins to make a whole lot of sense, rather than just telling people, oh, we got to change the way we're managing things, because they say, well, what's wrong? Well, what are the problems? So the plan is what by when, is understanding, for example, what value do we have to deliver today, or what does our customer, what do our customers need from us today? The do, how do we execute the work so that it flows as seamlessly as possible? And this is very, very important, how do we have a real-time response to problems? Because, as much as we want to eliminate waste and problems, the reality is we're never going to get there. We're going to strive to get there, but the problems are always going to occur. And this real-time response to problems is really about avoiding sort of the business firefighting mentality where something happens and everybody's scrambling around. Is that we want to have a rational way to respond. The check is, we talked about measurements. How did we do? You want that to be objective and factual. And if you use lean performance measurements, that's what you get. And the adjust is, how can we get better? How can we respond to the problems? And there's different types of responses. You could do, short term. Okay, so how do we just adjust here to get back on track? And for larger problems that are more recurring, what do we have to improve to actually reduce the impact of that problem? In the planning phase of daily lean management, which in PDCA, no matter how you're using PDCA, plan is always sort of it's the first step, and it's almost the most important step, because if you plan it right, everything else sort of flows smoothly. So we talked earlier about customers and accounts receivable, and how accounts receivable has direct interaction with a company's customers. And so the way accounts receivable interacts with a company's customers really shapes the entire customer experience. So here are some sources of demand. Okay, this can be information or that customers need from accounts receivable, or other parts of your organization need in order to deal with customers, which forms the demand. What do we have to get done today? So we talked about customer data management, setting up data or providing information to other functions. All right, it's and an important point here that Mike mentioned earlier. Accounts receivable is really integral in the order to cash process. And so you think about order to cash, it's accounts receivable. It could be like order entry or customer service, whatever you call it. It can be the sales group, and they're all responsible for, managing customers. There's the credit, accurate credit limits so customers can place orders. So what is the daily work that is involved that can possibly impact customer credit limits, and how do we try to get it done in the time frame needed so that credit limits are not impacted? Then there's, delivering the on-time accurate invoices. Now, in some companies, this may be very simple and easy. For example, in a manufacturing company, once orders are shipped, the system automatically just tells accounts receivable, here are the invoices to send out based on the shipments. It's somewhat fairly automated. In other cases, in more complex billing, you need information from upstream processes in order to do that. For example, I work for a software company, and the progress billing on the installation of the software, was a monthly invoice, but it was based on progress. And one of the problems in this company is that the installation team and the client didn't always see eye to eye on what progress was done, because certain thresholds had to be made before the bill was done. And so this company ran into a lot of problems where they would send out the progress bill. The company would come back to accounts receivable and say, oh, no, we're not going to pay this because we don't think the progress was done. And so you get into this long resolution process between the implementation team or the project manager and the client about whether the progress was made. We talked about applying customer payments and how that can impact customer credit. Managing collections, okay? This is sort of like a service aspect. How can accounts receivable make it simple and easy in terms of dealing with the customer to manage to resolve discrepancies? And finally, there's unplanned demand. I've worked in a few companies where accounts receivable is always getting phone calls from sales or customer service about some aspect of the customer status. And so all of these are sources of demand. And what's important here, we're giving you, some categories. You have to look at your accounts receivable process and say, okay, which of these really applies in our accounts receivable, and how are we going to schedule this demand? How are we going to know when it occurs, and how are we going to prioritize it? The other aspect of daily lean management is what we call the daily huddle, which in itself is a PDCA process. So, within the context of a daily huddle, what's the plan? What's the priority of demand based on based on the capacity of the process in that day? And capacity can vary, okay, because you might have a full team available, but maybe, certain people are going to be pulled out or unavailable for most of the day because they have some commitments like meetings and things like that. And so, what can we get done today? It may not be everything that you'd like to get done. And so then the rest of the demand goes into a backlog that you can always pull from. We talk about how did we do yesterday? What did the measures say? These are very discrete type measures. Yes or no? Did we deliver? Did we meet our schedule for the day? Yes or no? Were there defects? Yes. Okay, what were they? So the measures reveal the problems and issues. And then what we want to do in the context of the huddle is some initial root cause analysis. Based on what we know, what do we think the cause was? We're not trying to necessarily solve the problem, but we want to just do the initial root cause analysis. And then, how should we address these problems? Short-term countermeasures or process improvement? Related to the daily huddle is the visual board. We want to make status visible. Okay, and you can see on the board, a good layout of a visual board is the PDCA process, and everything that I've been talking about what the demand is, what the measures are, problems and issues, just put it on a board in a simple, easy layout. The final aspect of daily lean management is standard responses to abnormal conditions. Okay, things happen. Things are going to happen in a process. How are we going to respond? And we want to respond in a coordinated, consistent way. We don't want these responses to be every person decides on their own, and we definitely don't want it to be firefighting. So this is, you might, if you're familiar with lean thinking, there's this term, the and-on. There's a signal that something's wrong. And once that signal occurs, what do we do? And so this could be at an individual level. If I encounter a problem in my job in accounts receivable, how am I going to respond? Then there's the whole team response. So what can go wrong? We talked about changes in demand, the variability of processing times. Sometimes it takes longer to get work done than you thought. So how are we going to respond to that? Because if I'm working on something that takes longer, what about the other work I have to do? Changes in capacity, and then process waste. If I encounter a defect, what do I do? Do I fix that defect right now? Or maybe do I put it aside, work on it later? Or maybe do I hand that defect off to someone else who's going to be just focused on defects? All right, so let me do polling question number 3 real fast. And then Mike is going to wrap this webinar up. All righty, almost everybody's voted. Give you about 5 more seconds. All right. Thanks for doing that. And I'll turn it over to Mike.
Nick, you
process.
talked about you talked about applying lean thinking just to the team's daily work and understanding where's the team encountering issues and where is there an opportunity to improve. So let's go ahead and look at each of those two large segments of the receivables process, the generating the invoice and then applying the payment, and talk about what we've observed in our own work and our experience with other organizations as some approaches to improve the process, and just as some food for thought for all of you as you're thinking about which of these are issues in your own organization and your own organization's process. If batching is an issue and that once a month bolus of work is causing the team to potentially get behind on billing or other tasks, is it possible to smooth that out over the month? Is it possible to collect timekeeping once a month or other information on progress billing? So like it says here, can we collect upstream charges more frequently? Are there opportunities to change customer statement dates so that they're not all the first of the calendar month? Now, you may notice this happens a lot with things like credit card payments and mortgage payments. You're able to select a due date that is sometime during the month. It's not always the first of the month. You might consider billing more frequently, or even if that's not relevant, you might consider a partial bill development over the course of the month. So that builds on this first idea. Can we eliminate the upstream waste? Can you ensure that when you're ready to actually create and deliver the invoice, that you have everything that you need easily without searching and that it's defect free? So again, there's some elements of reducing batching here, but also go ahead and explore what is it about your customer's relationship with your company, in particular the billing terms in their contract, that may make it complex to generate an invoice, or may make it so that there aren't these clear black and white simple rules for how to generate the invoice. And also think about whether or not there are a significant number of approvals in your process before the invoice can make it out to the customer. And then what about invoice creation itself? Let's keep the invoices, and obviously, this is a straightforward improvement idea, but go ahead and look at your invoice from the perspective of the customer. Find a couple of key customers that you or the sales or the order team has a good relationship with, and talk to them about have them interpret the invoice for you. Let's make it easy to understand, but making it easy to understand helps us then simplify what do we need to put on it and may streamline our process for creating it. So that's from the invoice processing or invoice creation perspective. Now, when we're getting the payments and applying those payments, let's think about some of the common improvements that we've seen in those. So again, batching comes up frequently, and in this process, like it does in many of our processes in accounting, can we level load that across time? Obviously, we want to get payments posted to the customer account as quickly as possible when we receive them. So how would we level load potentially across the team if we can't level load across the calendar? So you can level load across time, and you can level load across people as well, and potentially cross-training folks. And we worked with one receivables team where each member of the team had a specific type of customer that they processed payments from, and they realized that that was causing delays on one or more people, but that they often had capacity that if they cross-trained on each other's customer types, they could apply those payments more evenly. So again, what's causing defects in applying the payment so that we've got the right customer, right account, right invoice? What is causing delays in customers paying their invoices? Well, again, you have to talk to them. We might do it directly, we might do it through customer service or the sales rep. And then, are there opportunities to simplify and streamline the payment methods? Are there ways to get payment directly, electronically? Is it possible that when a customer pays an invoice, it's automatically credited to the right account and right invoice? So again, lots of opportunities here. Some of them may be specifically relevant for your billing and revenue situations, and others may not be. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up with just a couple of thoughts around again, getting back to this idea of customer value. So as you're thinking about, and each of you hopefully is attending or listening to this webinar because there is something that you think would be important to address in your receivables process. So start where we did in the beginning and do some analysis and observation of your own process, and think about the three perspectives that we've talked about, starting with the company's customer's perspective. Where is the billing process a headache from their perspective, and how do you know? And then we get back to measurement. Maybe it's going to be important to measure the frequency and the type of customer complaints or calls or queries that you receive on invoices. So again, that results that speaks to the quality of the invoice. There may be other issues related to the company's customer in terms of the timeliness of payment and things like that. So where are there, first of all, headaches from the company's customer's perspective? And then just briefly, it's not on the slide, but briefly from the company's staff perspective, from the billing team's perspective, where are they experiencing the waste, the frustration, and the overburden? That might be an important place to start, or to focus and start to do some internal measurements, like Nick already said, in the daily management process around types of defects, frequency, and the frequency. And then from the company's perspective, do you have sort of unnecessary amount of write-offs or bad debt, or do you have unnecessary days in revenue outstanding sitting on the balance sheet? So again, these three perspectives, starting with the customer, are important for understanding where would you want to focus your analysis first. And so we've talked about the company's customer's perspective, and then I'll just wrap it up with the four-part process that we talked about at the beginning, and that Nick went over relative to continuous improvement and lean thinking in receivables. Again, where is the value being created, and how can the billing team streamline the process and make it so slick that the company is delighted with interacting with the company, and there increases the company's reputation and the opportunity for repeat business. In order to do that, we have to understand what waste is getting in the way. We have to measure that so that we're not solving something that is an anecdote, but we're solving something that is supported by data and understanding. And it needs to be a daily process to plan, check, and improve the work. Like Nick said, and I really think this is a very apt metaphor, daily management in a lean accounting team is like a classroom setting. We're learning and improving every day. So of course, we've got these webinars every month. Looking forward to the next one. There are also some workshops coming up in next month. You've got your lean accounting course on solving the standard costing problem coming up next month, and then every third Wednesday of the month, we have a free chat. So the best way to do that is to go to maskell.com, look at the events calendar, sign up for the emails, so you'll learn about not just the monthly free webinars, get clear information around how to sign up, and please do participate in that community chat. That's an opportunity for everyone interested in lean and accounting and finance to come and have discussion around topics that we prioritize each week based on who's there. And then importantly, continue your learning through the courses that are being offered, as well as, of course, we're always delighted if you have the opportunity to read the book and engage us with questions about what you've learned. Nick.
I wanted to just, it's not on the slide, but next Wednesday's Lean Accounting Community Chat is going to focus on the annual budgeting process, which many of you may be going through right now. And we have a guest, Steve Player from Future Ready Finance, and also the Beyond Budgeting North American Roundtable, who's going to be here to talk about how to improve budgeting and also take a whole lot of questions. And if you don't know Steve, he is very engaging, and he has a lot of good ideas. So, if you're involved in budgeting, hey, try to attend or pass the information along and let your people understand how to improve budgeting.
Great. We've got references here, obviously the book that we've just proudly published, and then Nick, your previous book. Please do go to the website, and you can get to the information about the book either through maskell.com or directly through the title of the book, practicingleanaccounting.com. Please reach out to either or both of us. We'd love to chat with you about what's most significant in your organization as an opportunity for improvement in accounting and finance. So again, would love to hear from you. Do we have the opportunity for questions? I don't know if any are coming in through the question panel.
There's a couple more administrative questions, which I'll answer. So Olivier asked about access to the previous presentation. So Olivier, if you're talking about the accounts payable, improving accounts payable webinar, which was a few weeks ago, yes, I can get you access to it. Send me an email as a reminder, then I can send you the link. Susie, if you're still on the presentation, you wanted to get a copy of it. It's in the handout part of your control panel, and you can download it. But if you, for some reason, you can't do that, again, send me an email. I'll be glad to send you a presentation. And then Brian had a question similar to Olivier's about accounts receivable and accounts payable. So Brian, same thing. If you did not attend the accounts payable webinar a few weeks ago, we're glad to send you a link to the recording. They're all available. So that's all we had in terms of any questions. Thanks for attending. Hope this was helpful. Please contact us if you have any questions. And we hope to see you at the remaining 2 webinars for 2021. And you know, in before the end of the year, our 2022 webinar schedule will be posted on our website. So hopefully, have a good day. Oh, 2 more reminders. If you need a CPE certificate, please send me an email. If you're watching a recording of the webinar, send me an email if you need a copy of the presentation. All right, so everyone, have a good day. And hold on. Oh, okay. So Brian just sent me another question. Just send me an email and I'll be able to get everything that you need, okay? So have a good day, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care. Take care.